A Siberian Tungus shaman drums himself into trance and descends through a hole in the earth to a lower world of spirits and ancestors. A San healer in the Kalahari dances around a fire until the boiling energy in his spine rises and he leaves his body to travel to a world above the sky. An Amazonian curandero drinks a bitter vine tea and finds himself in a jungle made of light, guided by beings that speak without mouths. These three people never met, their cultures never touched, separated by oceans, by thousands of years, by every possible barrier language and geography can build. And yet, when you strip away the local costume, the drum, the dance, the vine, they are describing the same architecture. A world below, a world above, a world in between where we live, a vertical axis connecting them, a tree, a mountain, a pole, a river that only certain people know how to climb. That is not folklore repeating by coincidence. That is a pattern, and patterns demand an explanation. Anthropologists have a term for this, the perennial structure of shamanic cosmology. Mircea Eliade documented it across Siberia, the Americas, Australia, and Africa, and found the same three-tiered universe again and again: upper world, middle world, lower world, connected by what he called the axis mundi, the world tree or cosmic pillar. The specifics shift with geography. The Norse called it Yggdrasil. The Siberians called it the smoke hole of the tent, opening straight up to the sky. The Maya carved it as a ceiba tree, its roots in the underworld of Xibalba, its branches in the heavens. Different bark, same tree. And it is not just the architecture that repeats, it is the details inside it. Journeys through tunnels, encounters with animal guides, a sensation of flight, beings made of geometric light, a tone or vibration that seems to hold the whole place together. Ask a Siberian shaman, an Amazonian ayahuasquero, and a modern subject in a controlled DMT study to describe what they encountered, and you will find sentences that could be swapped between them without anyone noticing. But let us be precise. The traditions are not truly identical so much as recurrently similar. The overlap is real, but it is usually better understood as a family of similar states and symbols, rather than prove that every tradition is literally describing the same geography. Across cultures, shamanic trance traditions often use similar induction methods: drumming, chanting, repetitive movement, fasting, sensory restriction, or psychedelics, and the trance state is described as narrowed awareness of the outside world, intense inward focus, and a changed sense of self. A recent scoping review found shamanic trances are widespread, non-pathological, and influenced by personal and environmental variables. A Max Planck study reported measurable brain network changes and perceptual decoupling during drumming-induced trance. This is the brain literally disconnecting from outside sensory input and turning its processing power inward. The outside world fades, self-awareness shifts, and suddenly the brain is free to generate its own reality. So here is the actual question, not "is this real?" which is the wrong question, but why would unconnected human minds, separated by everything except biology, keep constructing the same place? There are three serious answers, and none of them require you to believe in spirits to take the pattern seriously. The neurological explanation. The first is neurological. The archaeologist David Lewis Williams studied cave art and trance states and proposed that the human nervous system, under altered conditions, sensory deprivation, rhythmic drumming, fasting, certain plant compounds, produces predictable stages.
First, geometric patterns, grids, spirals, tunnels. This is a known effect called entoptic phenomena, produced by the visual cortex itself, not by anything out there. Vision science defines entoptic phenomena as visual artifacts arising from the eye itself. Pressure on the retina, altered blood flow, or changes in neural firing produce patterns that are universal to every human visual system. In the early stages of trance, the brain naturally generates these basic forms. Second stage, the mind tries to make sense of those patterns and turns them into meaningful imagery, animals, ancestors, tunnels leading somewhere. Classic neuropsychological models of shamanic vision argue that trance begins with these geometric and entoptic forms, and then the brain elaborates them into full-blown, meaningful scenes. That tunnel becomes a cave entrance to the underworld. That grid becomes a ladder to the sky. That spiral becomes a cosmic whirlpool. If every human brain runs on the same hardware, then every human brain under the same conditions may default to the same architecture. The realm is not discovered, it is generated, and it is generated the same way every time because the generator is the same organ. Research on hallucinations shows that culture affects what gets labeled a hallucination, what it means, and even its phenomenology. Cultural background and social interaction can organize both interpretation and the lived experience itself. In other words, two people may have a similar altered state substrate, but one culture trains them to describe it as ancestors, another as spirits, another as gods, and another as an upper and lower world. Shared biology gives the recurring structure. Culture gives the map. The Jungian explanation. The second is Jungian. Jung looked at this same evidence and proposed the collective unconscious, a layer of the psyche not built from personal memory, but inherited, shared, the same substrate underneath every individual mind. Jung believed the collective unconscious contains the whole spiritual heritage of mankind's evolution, born anew in the brain structure of every individual. On this view, the shaman is not hallucinating randomly. He is accessing a structure that was already there, common to the species, the way every human body has the same skeleton regardless of what clothes it wears. The upper world, the lower world, the world tree, the spirit animals are not random inventions. They are archetypes, innate, spontaneously generated psychological patterns that emerge from the structure of the human mind itself. Through ritual practices and trance-inducing techniques, shamans connect with these archetypes within the collective unconscious. The symbols they encounter, the cosmic axis, the celestial rider, the underworld journey, are ancient patterns that transcend individual experience and speak to something universal in human consciousness.
The Vedic explanation. The third is the one Western frameworks are least comfortable with, and it comes from the Vedic tradition, which mapped something structurally identical thousands of years before Iliade had a word for it. The Upanishads describe reality as layered, the Panchakosha, 5 sheaths from gross body to bliss, and describe higher and lower lokas, worlds, accessible through specific disciplined states, not open to just anyone. The method matters. The Vedic seers were explicit that you do not stumble into these realms by accident. You are trained into the capacity to perceive them, the way a telescope has to be built before you can see a moon nobody knew was there. If the Siberian shaman and the Vedic rishi are describing structurally identical territory using completely independent methods, that is either the greatest coincidence in the history of human thought, or it is evidence that consciousness itself has a shared shape, one that different cultures working blind to each other all eventually surveyed.
The Vedic tradition does not see these realms as generated by the brain or as products of the collective unconscious in the psychological sense. It sees them as objectively existing layers of reality, accessible to anyone who refines their perception sufficiently. The nervous system is not the generator of the realm. It is the instrument capable of tuning into it. The drumming, the fasting, the plant medicines, these are not creating the experience. They are removing the interference that normally blocks it. None of these three explanations cancel each other out, and that is the part worth sitting with. The neurological account explains the mechanism. The Jungian account explains the shared content. The Vedic account explains why not everyone gets there and what it takes too. Maybe the realm is real and the nervous system is simply the instrument capable of tuning into it. Maybe the realm is generated and its consistency just proves how uniform human neurology is. Or maybe, and this is the possibility most people do not sit with long enough, the distinction between real and generated by consciousness is a distinction that only makes sense if you already assume consciousness is separate from reality. Every tradition that actually built a map of these realms assumed the opposite. The honest position is not picking a side. It is noticing that the most geographically isolated cultures in human history all filed the same report, using the same method. Go inward, follow the axis, and something with structure is waiting there. The shamanic realms are not arbitrary. They are systematic ways of making sense of the world, of understanding illness, death, misfortune, and the relationship between humans and nature. The three worlds model provides a coherent framework for explaining why things happen and how to fix them when they go wrong. Shamanism endures as a powerful, recurrent cultural form because it taps into universal psychological mechanisms. It provides answers to existential questions, offers healing for physical and psychological suffering, and organizes communities around shared beliefs. But there is something else here, something that the scientific frameworks struggle to fully contain. The shamanic journey is not just a hallucination or a psychological regression. It is described as a deliberate, controlled, and repeatable exploration of a structured landscape. The shaman returns with information: where to find game, how to heal a specific illness, what the community needs to do to restore balance. This information is not random. It is actionable, precise, and often verified by outcomes. If the realm were purely generated by the brain, why would it produce information that works in the physical world? If the realm were purely an objective spiritual dimension, why would it only be accessible through specific neurological states? The boundary between inside and outside, between subjective experience and objective reality, begins to blur. This is where modern consciousness studies are heading. The hard problem of consciousness, why subjective experience exists at all, remains unsolved. We can describe brain activity during trance states, but we cannot explain why that activity produces the experience of traveling through a tunnel or meeting an ancestor. The shamanic traditions have been sitting with this question for thousands of years. Their answer is not a theory, it is a practice. What this means for us. The implications are profound. If the shamanic cosmology is a reflection of universal brain architecture, then the capacity for these experiences is latent in every human being. You do not need to be born into a specific tradition. You do not need to believe in anything beforehand. You only need to apply the methods: rhythmic induction, focused attention, and surrender of ordinary perception, and the architecture begins to reveal itself. This is not about adopting another culture's beliefs. It's about recognizing that the human nervous system, properly tuned, produces reliable, repeatable, structured experiences across all times and all places. The shaman is not a primitive relic. The shaman is a specialist in consciousness, a technician of the inner world, using techniques refined over tens of thousands of years. And here's the unsettling part. If these experiences are universal and repeatable, then the question is not whether they are real. The question is what it means that every human culture, working independently, arrived at the same map of reality. The materialist answer, that it's all in the brain, does not actually explain why the brain would construct such consistent, elaborate, and information-rich experiences. The spiritual answer, that these are actual realms, does not explain why they are so clearly shaped by cultural expectations and training. The honest answer is that we don't fully know. And that should be okay. The mystery is not a problem to be solved. It is an invitation to explore. Throughout human history, across every continent, in every era, human beings have entered altered states and encountered structured realms. They have described them in the language of their culture, but the underlying pattern remains constant. A vertical axis, a world below, a world above, and a middle world where we live, guide beings, tests and initiations, a return with healing or knowledge. This is not a coincidence. It is not cultural diffusion. It is not mass delusion. It is a pattern that demands to be taken seriously. The pattern suggests that consciousness is not a byproduct of brain activity, but something more fundamental, something that has a structure, a geography, a set of laws and inhabitants that can be explored and mapped. The shamanic traditions are the original cartographers of this inner geography. Their maps are remarkably consistent because the territory itself is consistent. Whether that territory is generated by the brain, accessed by the brain, or something else entirely, the fact remains human beings, properly prepared, can enter structured realms that are experienced as real, that produce actionable knowledge, and that share a common architecture across cultures. That should unsettle you a little. It's meant to. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And once you see it, the question becomes personal. What happens when you follow the axis yourself? The shamanic traditions do not ask you to believe, they ask you to experience. They offer methods, not dogmas. They invite you to go inward, follow the drum, the dance, the sacred plant, and see for yourself what is waiting there. And that is the true legacy of these ancient traditions. They are not relics of a superstitious past. They are technologies for exploring consciousness, preserved across millennia, waiting to be rediscovered. The patterns they describe are not beliefs, they are observations. And observations, once made, can be tested. So the question is not whether the shamans were right. The question is whether you are willing to test their findings for yourself. The drum is still beating, the fire is still burning, the vine is still brewing, the upper world and the lower world are still there, waiting for anyone brave enough to follow the axis. The honest position is not picking a side. It is noticing that the most geographically isolated cultures in human history all filed the same report, using the same method. Go inward, follow the axis, and something with structure is waiting there. That's all for today. Stay connected to us in this journey by liking and subscribing to